But now we'd like to introduce the next speaker. So Lelys Dinarte, coming all the way from the World Bank. She's an economist in the Human Development Team of the World Bank's Development Research Group. And her work is mainly on education, but with a focus on violence and crime, using both original data sets and administrative and geographic records.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate, for the introduction. Thank you to the organizer for giving me the opportunity to present this paper here in this conference. Thank you, Emma, in advance for your useful comments that I know it's going to improve the paper, and also all of you for being here. Well, I'm going to present you today this work, which is a co-author paper with Pablo Gaña. He's an international fellow from MIT and also assistant professor at the Asian Mission School in Malaysia. And this project is titled Reducing Violence in the Most Violent Context, experimental evidence which measure behaviors and neurophysiological results. This is evidence from El Salvador. This project, in a nutshell, it aims to reduce violent behaviors in school, and it was implemented in the context of the after-school program that included some cognitive behavioral therapy activities. It's a CBT inspired, it's not a full CBT integration, I'll give you more details about that. It was implemented in 5 public schools in El Salvador, which are located the most violent communities in the country. And we look at the effects on particular economic outcomes, such as misbehavior at schools, as I told you before, but we also look at the effects on academic performance. In addition, one of the main contributions of this paper is that we are also looking at a particular mechanism. And we are trying to see whether regulation of emotions from the CBT intervention is actually driving the effects of the reduction of misbehavior at school and also the improvement on academic performance. So that is this project. Yeah, so this is the agenda. I will jump directly to the motivation. What motivates this paper? Well, we know from the existing evidence that youth violence can increase the economic cost of health and justice services, which translates into a greater obstacle for economic growth. Just to give you an idea, in a particular region, which is the most violent in the world, using homicide rates, is Latin America. Just in the region, crime costs approximately 3.6% of our GDP, and can be up to 6.5% in some Central American countries, particularly those in the Northern Triangle, which are Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Just to give you a reference on how important the percentage is in terms of our GDP, is that just El Salvador spends on both education and health the same amount that crime costs to the country. And also, the US, the total crime costs approximately 2.75%, which is 1/3, more or less, of what costs crime in Central American countries. And that's at the macro level. At the individual level, we do know from the existing evidence as well that a concern from high exposure to violence is that it can create a snowball effect, meaning that if a child was exposed to domestic violence, it's very likely that he's going to be perpetrator of domestic violence, or even a higher level crime such as homicides. The point here is how exposed are children and adolescents to those sorts of violence, where they are, at least in low and middle income countries, they are highly exposed. 43% of the total worldwide homicides occur among youth between 10 to 24 years of age, according to the World Health Organization. And also, the 5 countries with the highest rate of homicide among youth between 10 to 19 years of age are located in Latin America. So for this region, actually, we want to start before they are in the criminal path. If we want to start acting and reducing that propensity, we need to start from schools, okay? How can we address those risk factors? There are several interventions. However, after-school programs seem to be intervention that can be pretty useful for this purpose. Why? Because they can deliver at least 2 services. The first one that are relevant for violence prevention. The first one is protection. They can keep children under adult supervision during some time school time, when their outside option is to be on the street, maybe acquire some criminal capital, for say something, right? Or bad practices. And the second service that these after-school programs can also provide is the learning, which means, like, if you include during that time that you are protecting the children, if you also include a particular curriculum oriented to foster their social-emotional skills or social development, then you can also increase the effectiveness of this intervention, because you are using like the same space and time to improve their skills. However, the problem with after-school programs is that most of the existing evidence is for developed countries, particularly for the US. Okay? However, as I told you before, the relevance of these programs is actually for low and middle income countries, such as those from Latin America. In that sense, we can use the setup of the after-school program, but improve its effectiveness by including a particular curriculum. And what curriculum can include? Well, we are using evidence from psychological intervention that we know that if they target some social-emotional skills or non-cognitive skills for at-risk youth and even for adults, they can have some impact on behaviors, education, and labor market outcomes. Some seminal papers of how the psychological interventions are working, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, are the works in economics, are the works from Sarah Heller. They implemented like 3 arts in Chicago, and also the works from Julian, Chris Blackman, and Margaret from in Liberia, right? Sarah Heller is implementing CBT with the youth, and Julian and co-authors are implementing CBT but with adults, with ex-convicted people. However, except for these two papers, there is no hard evidence on their potential mechanisms on how this intervention is translated into better economic outcomes or changes in misbehavior, particularly using the psychology of emotions, automaticity, and impulse control. Okay? And that's something that we are aiming to do with this paper, with this project. First of all, we aim to provide experimental evidence of the effect of this after-school program inspired in cognitive behavioral therapy on participants' behavior and academic outcomes in the context of, as I told you before, El Salvador, which is a low income country and also highly violent. In addition, I'm not going to present you these results, but we are finding that there are some spillover effects on the non-enrolled children, those who decide not to participate into the after-school program, which has more or less 1/3 of the total or direct effect of this intervention. In addition, which is another novel contribution from this paper, is that we are using physiological recordings from using the James and Lamb measures of emotion, dimensions of emotions, which are, we are using arousal as a proxy for stress and balance as a proxy of emotional regulation, to also provide some unbiased estimations of the children's emotion or students' emotions. And then we use experimental design to see whether the intervention is modifying or changing these emotions, and also whether that is like the mechanism that's also changing behaviors from the main results of our estimations. Okay, so that's what we're doing with this paper. And just to give you like the main results, the first 10 minutes, this after-school program is having positive impacts, particularly on misbehavior at school, and it's reducing those reports by 0.17 standard deviations, and it's also increasing or reducing school absenteeism by 23%. The indirect effects are that given these positive effects on attitudes towards school learning and also a better behavior in school, it's also increasing academic performance by between 0.11 to 0.13 standard deviations. I'm sorry. In terms of heterogeneity, we are finding that children with a greater propensity for violence are actually driving the results on absenteeism, but they are not driving the results on misbehavior. On misbehavior are the low violent children, as we were listening from the previous talk and also from Michelle's discussion, behaviors are difficult to change. So we may need some more intense interventions than this one to modify behaviors, especially for those who are used to have misbehavior at school or bad behavior. Then what about emotional regulation? We're finding that intervention is indeed modifying how children react to positive or negative stimuli, and we're also finding that using self-report measures of loss of control, that children are reporting that they feel that they can manage their deadlines compared to children assigned to the control group. Okay? So those are the main results. Now I'll give you more details about intervention and all the estimations, critical framework, and more details about the results. Okay? So let's start with intervention. This program was offered by a local NGO, which is working on Central America and Mexico, during the 2016 academic year. And these clubs were offered in 5 public schools in El Salvador. All participants attended 2 sessions per week during 7 months, from April to October. And each of the sessions lasted 1.5 hours. And it happened within school facilities after school time. It's important, each session had 2 parts. The first one was social skills development, which is a CBT inspired. And we are saying that it's inspired in CBT for many reasons. The first one is that it wasn't implemented by psychologists. It was implemented by volunteers who were trained by specialists from the NGO. That's something important. And second, because it just took some activities from CBT, it was implemented in addition to other activities related to develop social emotional skills. Okay? So that's why this is not a full CBT. It's possible that the full CBT can improve this behavior for most violent children, but in this case, we are not finding that with this low-intensity intervention, which is something that we learned from Michelle's discussion, that we may need some more intensive programs. In the second part, they implemented activities related to the clubs, such as playing basketball, soccer, etc. And the participants were students between 10 to 16 years of age, and that age range is relevant in the context because that's when they start being engaged in games. In El Salvador, we are arguing that even after 15 years of age, they are actually a bit late. They are actually starting to be enrolled in games. Okay? And our study sample included 1,056 voluntarily enrolled children. So from the 2,400 students from these 5 public schools, 1,056 of them decided to participate in the after-school program, and the other were the non-enrolled children. And those allows us to measure the effects on the skill from intervention. We did a block randomization, which means in each school we have 3 educational levels. We randomized 25% to the control group, 75% to the treatment group. Why we did that? Because this is like I will mark another paper. Because with this treatment group, I also assigned children to a particular group composition. I implemented a tracking by balance experiment in which I wanted to see whether tracking or integrating students with their propensity for violence was going to modify the effectiveness of this intervention. But that's another paper I'm happy to discuss later if you are interested. So we're going to use this randomization for this paper. The data we collected, I have separated into 2 strands, the main approach. Yes.
Sorry, why did the children, who decided for it to be volunteer or not? Was it the children, the parents, or?
That's what, no, the children decided to participate in the after school, but we also asked them for a consent, parental consent, to collect the data and also to participate in the program. But the children decided to enroll. Yeah, so we collected these 2 strands of data. More behavioral or attitudes towards school learning, which is according to the theory of change of the NGO, what this intervention is oriented to modify directly. And for that strand, we collected from 2 sources, the first one admin data. There are reports of misbehavior from teachers and also school attendance as a proxy for And we also collected a self-reported follow-up survey, which is, we use these two instruments. Those were already validated in the summary of the population.
So the control group kids wanted to be in the clubs, but you excluded them. Were they not accepted that?
No, the control group, they went back to their homes. They did not stay after school time in school.
Yeah, but they knew the clubs existed, and you allowed
They
them
knew,
to-
yeah, and yeah, that's how we went. Yeah, they knew. And what we did is gave them like a coupon that they can redeem next year, so they can attend the after school until next year.
And you said it was a lottery.
Okay. Yeah, and we also collect, but we can discuss that. And we also collect academic outcomes using admin data. Okay. Thank you. So these are some statistics from my full sample, and they are on average 12 years of age. Half of them are living with both parents, the other just with one or with any other adult, which is the normal family composition in El Salvador. In terms of exposure, they have to walk like 18 minutes from home to school. 5% of them report being alone after school time in their homes. And also, an estimation of propensity for violence, which I'm not going to discuss, but we can discuss later, is approximately 0.04, which is 12 times a similar estimation from similar children in Chicago. Okay? This is the main specification we are going to use to estimate the outcomes of interest, which is similar to the Times percentage. We are measuring ITT effects, intent to treat effects, and θ1 is going to give us the estimated effect of being randomly assigned to a treatment, which is the after school, on our outcomes of interest. We are controlling by secondary polynomial, which is propensity for violence, and also we are including a block randomization or districtification variable fixed effect. Designing the results, I have separated them into panels. In this one, I presented the positive attitudes, and this other half, panel A, balance and misbehavior. These two columns are self-reported data. This is teachers' reports. In terms of attitudes, we're finding that there is an increase on the index of positive attitudes self-reported by the children, and also they're reporting like devoting more time to do homework after school time, approximately like 20 minutes. In terms of absenteeism, admin data indicates that they are indeed being less absent from school. And in terms of misbehavior, it is approximately 22% of the total. In terms of violent actions, they are also reporting a reduction on their violent behaviors, and that's also similar to what teachers are reporting. Okay? In the intensity margin, there's a reduction of more or less 0.17 standard deviations, and the extensive margin probability of having misbehavior reports is also reduced by 6 percentage points. Is that transforming into a better academic outcomes? Our results say yes, and we're finding in the intensity margin an increase on math and science grades by 0.11 to 0.13 standard deviations, more or less, and also an increase in the probability of passing the course or going to the next school year by approximately 0.04 percentage points. Okay? So those are the results so far. Now we want to know whether it's the mechanism is emotional regulation. So why are emotions important from an economic perspective? Because evidence from neuroscience indicate that they can modify cognition, perception, and also attention and memory, and they can also change behavior in significant ways. Also, individuals exposed to highly violent environments may experience some intensive emotions and also stress. And we are aiming to address that. That they can translate into a more short-sighted and also risk-averse decision making, and also they can have like low performance level in the educational studies or at the workplace. The problem is how we can measure those emotions, how I can measure that I'm happy, or like I'm sad, that I'm nervous. Okay? And well, we can use self-report measures, for instance, the measure of the ANAs, AS, but the problem with self-reports is that we have some issues. can be affected by the emotional state of the examinee. The test setting is pretty important, has been learned from the paper that was presented yesterday. And also, which is pretty important in our case, is the reference bias. If I was treated by intervention, I will auto-report my emotional state, or I can also under-report it because because I know from intervention how I should behave, for instance, but I feel that I'm not that good, so I may under-report that. Okay, so it's not clear where the bias comes from. In that case, for these reasons, we are using methods from affective neuroscience to measure emotion. But we did is the following. We use these low-cost devices, which are the emotive POC, and we also set up a field setting in school. We implemented data collection in 3 stages. The first one is a pre-test resting emotional state, what's my baseline, okay? Then we implemented some psychometric tests to have more measures of potential mechanisms. And then we implemented we measured the emotional responsiveness, meaning that we showed the children some images and take elicit positive, negative, or neutral stimuli, and then we measured how their brains responded to those stimuli. Just pretty quick. During the first stage, we did this, that's the resting stage. We showed them a cross with a gray screen. Then we measured those recordings. We implemented a filter which aims to reduce the noise from other energy sources. And then we implemented this Fourier transformation, which aims to reduce variance. Okay? Then we build these emotional indices, which are arousal and balance. And then we implemented a battery of tests. And then we did the third stage, which is this one. We didn't show those images with the children, we showed different ones, but we show images, we measure their brains, how their brains were responded. We have implemented the same filters, the same transformations, and finally we built the indexes after we show the images. Okay? So that's process. Measure arousal, which is our proxy for stress, balance, our proxy for emotional regulation. We also collected these other 3 outcomes on psychometric tests. We measure the effects using similar specification. And what are the main results? We are finding that children assigned to treatment reduce their overreaction to particular stimuli. And we are finding that reduction is to positive stimuli, to negative stimuli. The coefficients are statistically non-significant, but are economically relevant because they are similar to the effects we are finding on the emotional responsiveness to positive stimuli. We were also finding, using the psychometric test, the reduction of locus of control. Yep, and so I'm going to skip this because I think I don't have time. 2 minutes, okay. So those are the results so far. The intervention is modifying attitudes towards school learning. That it's also modifying misbehavior at school. We're finding that a potential channel is emotional responsiveness. They are not overreacting to particular stimuli, and we are measuring the emotional responsiveness using physiological recordings. Okay. As I told you at the very beginning, this after-school program can have two potential channels or services, as I call them. One is the children are protected or they are indeed learning something. To measure, my design doesn't allow me to experimentally separate those potential channels, and we're actually doing that in another project in Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. We're trying to disentangle the protection and learning effects. So the effects are on the Zoom, probably by the end of this year. And however, what I can do is using the 5% of children who are protected, 55% of children were not protected to try to measure whether intervention is actually generating some learning or if they are just being protected. Okay? And I'm finding that the main results are more likely to be caused by a learning process. Okay? Not necessarily just for being protected, which is actually important because then this intervention has a very relevant potential to reduce violent behavior in the region. Yeah, and
Sorry,
let's
the
go
time.
on. Okay. Okay. So thank you for your attention.